Hello friends. Let's start today's story. The eviction notice was taped to the door of my apartment, glaring at me in bold red letters. I had 1 week to leave. I sighed and ran my hand through my tangled hair. I should have known this was coming. I had been behind on rent for months. But I had always managed to scrape up enough money to pay it at the last minute. This time, though, I was out of options. I had lost my job a few months ago, and I had been struggling to find a new one ever since. I had used up all of my savings, and I was now living off of credit cards. I knew that I couldn't keep this up for much longer. I had nowhere else to go. My family lived hundreds of miles away, and I didn't have any close friends who could let me stay with them. I was completely alone. I sat down on the couch and stared at the eviction notice. I didn't know what to do. I had always been a proud person. I had always taken care of myself. But now, I was at the end of my rope. I had failed. I thought back to the life I had built for myself. I had a good job, a nice apartment, and a social life. But it had all come crashing down so quickly. I had lost my job because of a downsizing at the company. I had been offered a severance package, but it wasn't enough to cover my expenses for very long. I had tried to find a new job, but the market was tough. I had been on dozens of interviews, but I hadn't been offered anything yet. My savings had dwindled, and I had been forced to start using credit cards. I knew that I was getting into debt, but I didn't have any other choice. Eventually, I had fallen behind on my rent. I had tried to talk to my landlord, but he was unwilling to work with me. He had served me with an eviction notice. I was at my wit's end. I didn't know what to do. I had nowhere else to go. I stood up and walked over to the window. I looked out at the city below. I had lived here for 5 years. It was my home. But now, I was being forced out. I felt a tear roll down my cheek. I wiped it away quickly. I didn't want to cry. I didn't want to give up. I turned away from the window and walked back to the couch. I sat down and picked up the eviction notice. I read it over again, slowly this time. 1 week. I had 1 week to leave. I stood up and took a deep breath. I knew what I had to do. I had to find a place to live, even if it was only temporary. I gathered my belongings and put them in a suitcase. I locked the door to my apartment for the last time and walked away. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew that I had to find a new home. I had to start over. I walked for hours, aimlessly wandering the streets. I didn't know what else to do. I was tired, hungry, and scared. The sun was starting to set when I came across a small park. I sat down on a bench and took a rest. I watched as the children played in the park. I was reminded of a simpler time, when I was a child myself. I had no worries then. I thought about my future. What was I going to do? How was I going to get back on my feet? I didn't have any answers, but I knew that I had to keep going. I couldn't give up. I stood up and walked away from the park. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew that I had to find a way. I'm currently staying in some friend's garage made into a temporary apartment until I get back on my feet. Right off the bat of moving in, I got weird vibes in it. For the first couple of weeks I kept having intense nightmares that were partially sleep paralysis, where someone/thing is in the garage with me, hiding in the corners watching me, then slithering around and peeking at me from below the side of my bed, or something coming up behind me and grabbing me. One specific window in the garage creeps me out the most. It's not covered with anything, so if anyone was outside they could look in, and I can't see out due to the lights I have on inside. My cat will often sit in the window and scratch at it as if she's trying to get to something outside of it, which is weird for her because she's freaked out by going outside / is a big wimpy indoor pampered baby, so the only conclusion I have is that there's something out there she's trying to get at. One day a couple of weeks ago, I was listening to music on my headphones. I had my laptop open. Had nothing but the main screen on it. I was dancing around vibing to the music when I suddenly heard a weird deep sound somewhere in the garage with me when the song I had on was ending and I could slightly hear my surroundings again. I turned around and on my laptop the screen was suddenly jumbled and glitchy looking and then started showing / flashing these weird symbols that didn't look familiar at all. I ripped my headphones off and this terrifying sound was playing from my laptop. Like this deep, demonic voice that sounded like it was speaking backwards was playing. It was the scariest thing I'd ever heard in my life, and I love spooky stuff. But this was like the type of evil voice that I've only heard in my absolute worst nightmares. It resembled the song Masked Ball from the Eyes Wide Shut soundtrack. But way deeper and more evil and creepy sounding. The strange glitchy symbols kept flashing and changing on the screen while this weird backwards voice was speaking through my laptop. I tried to shut it off or hit ESC but nothing was working, so I finally slammed it shut and immediately had a really bad panic attack. I ran inside to my friend's house and told them what happened while I had an absolute meltdown. I made them go back into the garage with me and inspect the laptop and the plugs in, everything we could to try to explain why it did that. We couldn't find an answer. What's even weirder is that we all noticed that my laptop was actually still on mute from when I muted it a couple of days earlier, making it even more strange that I was hearing this coming from my laptop speakers. It should not have been possible. I still have no idea what happened or why. I'd love to chalk it up some weird technology glitch, but there was absolutely nothing opened on my laptop at all, and it was muted. I don't have schizophrenia and I'm not crazy or anything. Like I swear on my life this happened and wasn't a hallucination or something. I really wish I had a logical explanation for it because it would ease my mind. It significantly impacted me adversely for an extended period. The night after it happened, I spent hours outside smoking cigarettes staring at the garage from afar, terrified to go in and sleep. I still have regular nightmares and sleep paralysis of something being in there with me.